Okay.
Hi guys, welcome back to Hear Our Voices. Is your host Kay did come back out to you one more time. So I'm gonna get some housekeeping in the way. So as you know, we have got the contest winner, well, the giveaway winner for last month. We plan to do giveaways every quarterly or so to people who live in shelter, and the family homeless shelter, I would say, to be more specific, because we have so much different categories of people in shelter, and it's also only for New York City. When we get a little bit bigger, maybe we could do funding for other states, but right now we can only do for NYC. Sorry. Um, Please also follow us on our other social media. The link tree will be down below: Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram. And we do a little here and there on Reddit, but there's nothing to really follow on there. And we drop videos. We try as much on YouTube. It's usually these kind of videos. So when you see this, guys, it'll be on YouTube. So hey, and also if you know anybody who wants to be on the podcast, who wants to give resources to the podcast, because we do have a resource packet. Again, that will be in the link tree down below. We would love for you to get that information. If you're a person with lived experience who has experience in a family shelter in New York City with your child, we would love to have you on the podcast. You can show your face, you cannot show your face. It all depends up to you. We take all walks of life of people, and we just want to hear your story so we be able to learn from it, and also know that people whoever's listening could either, if they can help to solve the problem, they could solve the problem. They are a person who's in it right now. They could know that it's not going to be always in this predicament. You could have a way to come out of it. So that's a little bit about that. But I'm gonna say his full name because I love it. I'm just saying. I know he gets it a lot. So
Yes.
just you two, Michael Jackson. I'm just saying. His name is Michael Jackson. His real name is Michael Jackson, guys. So welcome to Michael Jackson. So yeah,
Thank you. Thank you. No middle name either, just
right.
Michael Jackson. Yeah.
Did Michael Jackson have a middle name? I don't
Yeah,
know.
Joseph. Yes. He's
I
named
think
after his dad.
probably I
Yeah.
knew that. Probably I knew
Yeah.
that. Yes. If you're
Yeah.
young, you're probably like, who's Michael Jackson? But if you're older, you know who Michael Jackson is. He
That's
was
right. He was when I was born, he was 14. He was still a child singer. And he was
Ooh,
like he was like a very talented by that age, everybody knew he was going to be very talented, but he was
right,
cute and he was still black and he was,
right,
he still had his regular nose and
right.
yeah.
He went through a lot. He went through a lot.
He
But he is
did.
one of the greats, and probably the greats, to be honest.
Yeah,
He was very talented as a man, like
very
really,
talented.
really, really
Very
was talented.
yep,
His little childhood was robbed from him, but
that's true.
it is what it is. What can you do? So we're
That's
here
true.
to make changes. So these things would have happened to our kids.
That's
So,
true.
but
I think when I think about him, I think about the lesson of you have to have people around you that are willing to tell you the truth, whether you want to hear it or not. And I don't think he had that,
that's
right? I think people, all of us fall into this, whether or not you're a celebrity or not. Like you want to hear people just like pump you up and tell you everything you do is right.
right.
But no matter what, you got to have at least one person that if you do something crazy, they'll be like, you know what? That's kind of crazy. Maybe
Out of hand. Let me
gotta
just
have a
bounce back.
person to check you. Yes,
Right,
yes. Otherwise, you'll start buying monkeys and zoos and
right.
yeah,
Ah, poor thing, poor thing.
yeah,
But so Michael's actually he writes. He's a writer. He's an
yes.
accomplished writer. I wish I had that talent, but if I had to pick writing over talking, I would definitely pick talking.
Oh, yeah,
I'm not gonna lie to you, but he's a writer and he has accomplished so much in his life, and he's a person with lived experience. Actually,
yes,
I want him to tell you a little bit about himself and how he's come this far right now. Where are you in your
yeah.
life right now, Michael?
Well, right now I'm in a relatively stable place in terms of housing and even in terms of just like my son just got accepted to transfer to college. I'm very happy about that. But but yeah, I had an experience with homelessness both as a child and as an adult,
Mm,
as a son and as a father with my son. Um, and it's interesting because when you're going through this stuff, a lot of us don't realize how many other people are going through it, and they don't even realize. Like I didn't realize I was homeless as a kid,
right,
right? I didn't define it as homelessness. Like I was living with relatives, we were living on couches and couch surfing and all of the stuff that we now define as homelessness. And I didn't even know that. My mom sort of shielded that from us. And it wasn't until I was an adult that I looked back and was like, oh wow, I had housing insecurity,
right,
growing up and then again. And then as an adult, the most recent experience with homelessness was my late wife passed away, and my son and I were in an apartment here in New York City that wasn't safe. That wasn't like it was a legal basement apartment. We didn't know that it was a legal basement apartment. The bank foreclosed on the landlord. We didn't even know he was behind on the mortgage.
After you
Like,
pay all the rent.
yes, we had paid the
Acceptable.
rent and done everything that we were supposed to do. And then one day the lights went out and we had no electricity in the summertime during a heat wave, and um, and we didn't know that he had all these violations and all this stuff that we didn't know. And so, one of the things that I think a lot of us that deal with housing insecurity and homelessness struggle with is sort of the guilt of, well, maybe I did something wrong. I
Right.
shouldn't have something. I shouldn't have, whether it's substance abuse or whether it's physical abuse, or maybe it's, you didn't do as well in school, so you didn't get the good job, so you couldn't afford whatever. Is we often will blame ourselves, and even I was in that zone, and I was in a situation that objectively you could see it had nothing to do with me,
Right.
right? Like literally nothing to do with me. But I still felt the shame and the guilt that often comes with housing insecurity, with homelessness, with poverty in general. Um, and I had done, quote unquote, all the things that you're supposed to do. I had gotten my college degree. My wife had had her college degree, and uh, we did all the things that they say that you're supposed to do for things like this not to happen to
Right.
you. And all it took was, her illness with cancer and her death, and then the landlord just being crappy, and um, and from then I was moved. We were displaced. We were categorized as displaced.
Right.
Um, and there's also, I'm sure many of the people who are listening will know this, there's this education curve that you go through. You have to learn all of these terms, like
Right.
displaced versus homeless, and are you in an at-risk group or not an at-risk group? And
Right.
um, one of the issues I had when I was asking for help, there was a point at which we weren't homeless yet. We're still in the apartment. The lights were out. The apartment was going to be foreclosed, and I reached out for city agencies and the other organizations. And one of the issues was I didn't fall into the categories, right? So some of the organizations would only help you after you got evicted.
Which is
And
ridiculous.
right, and I wasn't evicted, right?
Right.
And some of them would only help women and children or people in domestic violence situations. And for guys, they would only help veterans, guys who have been in the military,
Right.
which is great. Like all of those communities need help and they all have
Right.
their special issues. But for people who don't fall within these categories,
Right.
my son was over 18, so I wasn't dealing with a little kid, and I never been in the military. It wasn't a sort of domestic violence situation or a substance abuse situation.
Right.
All of the sort of slots that they put you in. And
Right.
so I got turned away from a lot of places, and not even turned away in a we can't help you, but here's a list of places who might sort of way.
Right.
And this ties into something else I definitely wanted to touch on with you today. I wanted people to hear is the importance of dignity, right? Of us believing in our own dignity and our own, like we deserve to be treated with dignity, all of us, no matter what your issue is, no matter, whether or not you have been incarcerated or you've quote unquote done bad things or whatever it is that you might be putting on yourself, that all of us deserve a certain level of dignity and to be treated with respect as people and individual and, children of God, right?
Right.
And what happens in the process of homelessness and shelters and all of that thing is a lot of times the interactions you have, you're not treated with that dignity. And so you have the internal sense of shame and blame that goes on. And then you have these interactions with either city agencies or whatever, where you're being treated with disrespect. And you go to agencies, they don't even look you in the face. They're just looking at the paper the whole time.
Right.
Right?
Right.
I took my son, because I used to take him when we would go deal with the city, because he needed to be part of this process. I didn't want to, I wanted him to see it and understand it and not be shielded from it, but I
Right.
also wanted to talk to him about it to process it.
Okay.
My son is on the autism spectrum, and he's sort of high functioning, but sometimes it's very helpful to talk to him about these social interactions because it doesn't click for him the way it does for people who aren't on the spectrum.
Right.
And so I took him to the agency, and you wait in line and you finally get your number called, and we go down to this cubicle, and the guy didn't even look me in the face. He didn't say hi, he didn't anything. He just like started going down the checklist and sort of treating me like a number. And I did something I had learned from my mother many years ago, which is you got to force them to see you
Right.
as a person. And do it in a way, you could do it in a sort of aggressive way, which sometimes happens.
Right.
But for me, it was like I use sarcasm. And so he was asking me these questions, and I just stopped and I said, and I looked sort of like he's looking at the paper, and I sort of put my face in between the paper and him, and I said, "Hi, good morning. How are you?" Right? And he looked up and was like, "Oh, hi, good morning, Mr. Jackson." And it forced him, right?
Right.
And I get that many of them are um, overworked, and many of them are underpaid, and many of them are undertrained. I get all of that,
Sure.
right? But it is like when you're going through the process and you're dealing with that on a daily basis, coupled with just bureaucracy and paperwork and all the other things, and the sense of guilt that we sometimes put on ourselves, it's very taxing, and it wears on you, and
Right.
it ages you, and it could even make you physically ill, right?
For sure.
So I wanted to definitely touch on, like, we need to as people going through this, we need to understand our own self-worth, that we deserve to be treated with dignity, and we are, children of God, no lesser than anybody else.
Right.
And that we have to, in small ways and in productive ways, demand that the system treat us with that kind of dignity. I was at a meeting this week, and one of the guys who's a homeless advocate, and he was asking a really tough question, which is how do you instill self-worth in people? How do you get people to see their own value when they've been told either by the system or by whomever or by themselves that they deserve the bad things that are happening to them? And it's tough. Like, I have no answer for that, but I think it starts with us understanding, and that that none of us are better than anybody else, whether you've had a substance abuse problem or you've been incarcerated or whatever it is that you might blame yourself for your situation, that none of that excuses being treated without dignity. So I was blessed I was raised in a single parent household, very poor in southern Jersey. And in the 80s, me and my sister and my mother was disabled. And so we had a lot of housing insecurity, a lot of income insecurity, and a lot of violence in the neighborhood. It was like the crack days. It was all the things that you see when you watch television now about the 80s, right? And I was like a teenage boy, so I was in a very the danger came from the neighborhood, and it also came from the police, and it also came from, it came from all the ways. Um, but my mother had this thing where she demanded people treat her with respect. And here she is, this disabled Black woman, poor Black woman, and but in her mannerisms with people, in her interactions with people, and it's not about sort of saying, you will treat me with respect. Like,
Right.
that's not it. But I think it starts with understanding you deserve that
Right.
respect, and then kind of, making people look you in the eye and see you as equal. So I hope that lands with people who might be listening, who have gone through this stuff. Um, that we have to first of all be kinder to ourselves and be
True.
less like, oh, I should be doing this or I shouldn't have done that, less punitive about our humanity, um, and also demand that other people treat us with that respect as well. So
That's true. I'm happy that you brought up actually that like when you went to the HRA office and you did that, because a lot of times the people in the system, I think what it is, some people like data, some people like to have like, that interaction, but a lot of
mm,
times people see you as numbers. And you're not
yes,
just a number on the paper. No, I'm a real person who has real needs, who needs
yes,
real help. And I
yeah,
think that's the problem. And a lot of times people in those offices, as you said before, they are overworked, they're
yes,
underpaid, and they're undertrained. A lot of them.
yes,
People who've been
yes.
there for 20 years, yeah, they got the hang of it, but usually the newer stuff, they're confused about it because it's like that's not part of their forte.
They
So
got
they're
200
lost.
people on their caseload,
Right.
right? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and it's some of it, I mean, some of them are just jerks, right? But I
Of
think,
course.
but I think, I tell people who aren't from New York, people have this image outside of New York that, oh, New Yorkers are so rude and they don't
Right.
say good morning and they're really brash with you or whatever. And it reminds me of what I tell them, which is, we live in a city, it's almost 9 million people that live here.
Right.
And so and on your way to a place, you might pass 10,000 people on the train. You might
Right.
visually see that many people. And so for these people who live in small towns, they look at it and they're like, oh, you guys don't say hi to each other. Well, as a
Right.
practical matter, you couldn't get anything done. If we said
You
good morning
would.
to every person we saw, right? And so I think it's human nature when you are overloaded with numbers to go into yourself and
Right.
to be sort of like to create a filter where you kind of distance people. And I think that's what happens with some of these workers where the numbers are so overwhelming in terms
Right.
of their caseload and even in terms of like their power to even to affect change
Right.
is so limited and their numbers are so large until psychologically they just sort of like cut themselves off and maybe to protect themselves will try to see you just as a number. Like, I can't get into your story, I can't get into your story, I got 100 other people. And
Right.
I get that, but the damage it does, um, as a practical matter, because what happens is no one wants to be treated like that, right?
Exactly. It's true.
And so if you keep getting treated like that, it is perfectly normal to disengage and to not ask for help and to not deal with those agencies because you don't want to be dehumanized. You don't want to have to go through that. I still have to go to HRA sometimes.
Oh my
I
gosh.
had a situation this year, and I'll tell it. I don't mind telling it, where I had to recertify,
Of
right?
course.
And again, this is a thing. This is one of those I did everything right situation, right? You had
Right.
to recertify. You had a deadline to recertify. I did it within the deadline. I did my call. The lady said, "Oh, well, all you need to do is, upload this document that says that your son is enrolled in school." I did that. I verified that she got it. it was time for my benefits to hit my card. Nothing came. This is a week
Mm.
before Thanksgiving. No
No.
money, no money for food. Right, no money for food. This is like the 15th. Week before Thanksgiving, no money for. Well, again, this is a situation where, like, I thought this was going to happen, but
Right.
you can't really complain. You can't go into the office and complain until something happens,
Right. And that's
right?
annoying part about it.
Yes, you can't. Just like me, you had to wait till you get evicted. I had to wait until the money wasn't there
Right.
to go in and say, "Hey, the money's not there." So anyway, I went in, and the lady was very nice, I have to say, and she was like, "Oh no, you did everything you were supposed to. Somebody didn't press some button, do something on their end that they were supposed to."
That's crazy.
And they said, "Oh, well, it'll be there in 3 to 5 days." Well, 3 to 5 days was the day before Thanksgiving.
Oh my gosh.
And it came up Wednesday before Thanksgiving came up, money wasn't there.
Oh my
Right
gosh.
now, each one of these interactions, I had to go into the office, and each one, I was sort of emotionally preparing myself to be treated in a dehumanizing way. I was like, it was stressful, it was anxious. I was surprised when I wasn't treated poorly,
Right.
happy but surprised. Um, and eventually they sort of like were like, "Oh yeah, we put it on your son's card and we didn't put it on your card," or some craziness, and it worked itself out. Um, but I could totally see people trying to avoid the stress of going into the office and doing all of this sort of like background stuff and making the calls and staying on hold for as long as you need to, just because of the stress and anxiety that it creates. Um, and this is why I tell people around homelessness and around any kind of social program around poverty that being um, poor and having housing insecurity. Now, first of all, in America, probably 80% of us have housing insecurity. Housing insecurity just means if something changes, you might not have a place to live. And a lot of people live with housing insecurity in this country that don't understand that they do, right? And um, we just have to understand that there's a lot of us going through that stuff. Um, and that it is a trauma. Being poor and having housing insecurity is a trauma in and of itself. It is emotionally traumatic. It your blood pressure goes up. You may have trouble sleeping. Like there are physical manifestations of the stress that comes with going through this. And if you add on to it things like if you have a kid, as you know, if you're a parent and you have to shepherd your kid through it, that's extra stress. Um, Many of us have some people have substance abuse problems, so it sort of pokes at that struggle. You might be going through that struggle, and here are these stressors poking at that. For me, I have depression, clinical depression, which is its own thing. And so I have to be very careful about making sure that the stress around housing insecurity doesn't exacerbate my depression. And I'm like, oh, I don't need to take my medication. I don't need to go to therapy, and then that gets. So, I mean, I think that there needs to be more of a recognition in these spaces that, it is a trauma, and to treat it like a trauma and to see the ways in which these things are interconnected and can make them make all of the things worse or all of the things better if we don't see that. So as you can see, I've thought about this stuff, right? Oh, wait, your microphone's off. I think you're muted. Now I can't hear you yet. Oh, there we go.
Now I'm gonna have to edit it out. Like, oh my God. It's all right.
Yeah.
But I could totally see that you thought about it. It makes sense. There's a lot of different angles to different things and things like that. So I want to go a little bit back into your story. I want to get into your childhood first, and then when you get in your adulthood, because I
Okay.
don't know maybe I don't know if you know if it affects you or not, because sometimes they say that we go through a cycle of things, especially with
Yes,
homelessness. So I want to see how much you remember from when you were a child, actually, because you said it didn't really. You
I
said
didn't
you wasn't
know.
affected. You didn't know you was homeless.
Yeah,
As you
yeah.
get older, which if you don't know, guys, um, people think that doubled up is just like if you're in somebody's home and you're just staying there. Yeah, I'm not homeless. I don't have these things. Technically, not counted as a homeless person in the system, but
Right.
technically you're categorized as a homeless person because you
Yes.
don't have your own home, your own lease,
Yes.
so your own spot. So
Yep.
a lot of people, even myself, before I got into this work, I didn't think of myself as homeless. I was on somebody's couch, but I
Yep.
was homeless for a few months because I was
Yep.
on somebody else's, space and area.
Yep.
Um, so I wanted to see as a child, how do you become in your family's place? Did it happen gradually? Did it happen like all of a sudden you were just out and you had nowhere to go?
Well, I'll tell you, and it was very interesting because we were when I was is my older sister and I, she's 3 years older than me. My parents got divorced when I was 6 years old. She was 9 years.
Mm.
And up until the divorce, my dad was in the Navy. He was sort of a career Navy guy, and we had traveled, like we lived in Japan on bases and stuff. And so
Ooh,
this is like
okay.
0 to 6 years old, right?
Right,
And when you're in the military, people in the military don't really have a lot of money, but you have access to stuff. So you have your housing is free, right?
right,
People don't understand that military housing is government housing. A
right,
lot of people are against government housing, but then they're
right.
like, "Oh no, we need to give it to." No, military housing is government. Um, and so we had my parents had a car. We had this sort of things of middle classness
Right.
up until they got separated when I was 6. And so
Mhm.
up until that age, I didn't really think about like we just had stuff. And not only was I young, but there wasn't a lot of lack of stuff. I mean, we weren't rich, but we had food or whatever.
Right.
My parents, my dad left my mom,
Mhm.
um, and they were like 20, 30 years old at the time.
Okay.
And my mother had decided, like many women in that generation, that she was going to not work and just raise us and be a in-home thing. Well, the problem with that is she didn't have a lot of marketable skills. So when they got separated and she had to find a job for herself, well, all she had was a high school diploma. We had to move back to the United States because, if one of the people's in the military and they get separated, you got to move, can't live abroad if you're not with the military person. So we moved back to Camden. We moved back to Camden, New Jersey, where my mother and father were from. And there was like I don't know, 4 year period where a lot of these things piled up on each other. My parents got separated, and so she was looking for a job. And then my mother all of a sudden um, got multiple sclerosis. Like all of a sudden, she's walking down the street and she trips and falls. And she goes to the doctor, and the doctor says, "Yeah, you have multiple sclerosis." And if you know anything about multiple sclerosis, it is degenerative. Like, there is no cure. It only gets worse. At the time, there were no drugs to treat it at all. Now they have some drugs that mitigate it. But it's sort of like Parkinson's or Alzheimer's, like where there's no cure. It's just a matter of how fast do you decline physically. And so within a span of 4 years, this 30-year-old woman with 2 kids went from sort of middle class wife with a husband living in Japan on a military base to she lost her sight. She had to use a wheelchair. We had to get on welfare. Um, um, my parents, when they were younger, my dad had bought a house, in the 70s, back when you could buy a house for almost nothing.
I
But my
know,
mom,
right?
yeah, but my
Yeah.
mom couldn't afford to keep the house up. She couldn't afford to pay the mortgage because she's just this woman who, and and working hard, trying to sort of like burn candles at both ends or whatever.
Right.
And I think one of the really most emotionally traumatic things for her as a kid watching her go through it, even more than the divorce, was losing the house. was the
That's
bank coming and taking the house. That was a huge deal for her. And so I knew about the stresses of us not having money and the stresses of her health going down, but I didn't know that we were homeless. I just thought, and this was also in Camden where there's a lot of poverty in Camden. And
mm,
so it's almost a benefit sometimes when you're in a poor neighborhood where you don't have proximity to all the other people who have other stuff that you don't have. So you
right,
don't quite get how poor you are
right,
because everybody's broke, right?
right. Everybody got money.
Everybody's got government cheese, everybody's right.
Right.
Um, it wasn't until my teenage years when my mother, in an effort to get us to have a better education, she moved us. She plugged into a New Jersey state agency for disabled people who helped her find stable housing. The New Jersey Commission for the Blind,
Okay.
and who shepherded her through a process of finding stable housing. And she moved us out of Camden into the suburbs because she thought, well, I want them to get a good education so they can go to college, and the inner city doesn't have the good public school system, so let's move them out to this suburban area.
Mm,
And at the time, we thought it was, at least I thought it was great. I was very happy. The housing had stabilized. We were moving out of a very dangerous sort of crime-ridden area, and so I was happy about it. My sister was not so happy because her friends were back in the hood. But what I didn't know, and that I've learned since, is that it is harder to be poor in non-poor areas.
it's true.
It's much harder because you see all the stuff you don't have,
Yeah.
and you see the disparate treatment that you get based on what you have or don't have. And we moved to like this green leafy suburb with kids with professional homes and sort of Leave It to Beaver type childhoods, and that was tough. And if you add into that things around, at the time, and it's much more integrated there now, but at the time, the issues around race, the
Mm,
issues around ableism, right? Like my
right.
mother, because she was in a wheelchair, people treated her differently than before she had been in a wheelchair. People sort of looked past her and or at least tried to, but she demanded that they look at her.
Right.
But yeah, I didn't get that sometimes that proximity, and here in New York, because New York is so cosmopolitan, no
Right.
matter how poor of a neighborhood you're in, you're not very far from very wealthy people.
That's true. That's
And
very
you get on the train, you're with a guy who works at Wall Street, you're with a homeless guy. Like we're very, a lot of the places in America aren't like that. People are very
right.
cloistered in their neighborhoods.
Right. We're one of
There
a
and
kind. Welcome to New
yeah,
York.
and for New York, the wealthy people are forced to confront poverty, and
Right.
poor people are forced to confront wealth.
Right.
Um, and so that has, sometimes that can have an emotional reaction for both sides. But yeah, I didn't realize how much of the trauma around housing insecurity I went through as a kid affected me as an adult until many years later. I was probably 30 years old,
Mm,
going into therapy for my depression and talking to my therapist about my childhood.
right.
And my therapist, just sort of as an aside, was like, "Oh, well, you do know that you grew up homeless, don't you?" And I was like, no, I didn't." And she said, like, no, like if your name's not on the lease,
right.
that's not your home,
Right.
right? And if you're in a situation where the person whose place it is at any point can say you got to go, that's
Right.
housing insecurity. That's not right. It doesn't matter if it's your aunt or your grandmother or right or your best friend or whatever.
Right.
And and the other thing she said is she's the one that taught me that housing insecurity and poverty in general is a trauma, just like veterans in war or people in domestic violence situations. Like just being poor and just having housing security is its own emotional trauma.
Right.
And it really shifted the way I saw my childhood. Like it was a real eye opener, right? It was a real shift. It reminds me of Trevor Noah, the comedian, South African comedian,
Mm-hmm.
grew up in South Africa, and he makes this joke about how he wasn't black until he moved to America. Because in
Right.
South Africa, it's white, colored, black, and Indian, right?
Right.
And black is at the bottom and white is at the top and colored sort of in the middle. And so he grew up with this idea of himself as colored.
Right.
And then he came to America and we don't do all of those gradations. You black.
Right.
And
Which annoys me a little bit. It annoys me just
yes, yes,
right.
yes. That's right. And so, he talks about how transformative that moment was. And I think
Right.
for me and for many of us to go through it, the realization of what it is that you're going through and how tough it is that you're going through, how tough the things are that you're going through can be very transformative. It can be empowering, but it can also be, it just changes the way you see yourself in the mirror.
True.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting, like it
Mm.
takes a whole person who's not connected to you to tell you that, you were homeless, right?
Oh
And
yeah.
your whole world just
Yeah, and
almost
my
crumbling around you.
whole
Like,
world.
what?
Well, and
What are you
the
talking
other
about?
thing, that happened that was amazing, and sometimes the universe will just like put stuff in front of you and be like, "I'm trying to tell you this thing," right?
Right.
I after I graduated from high school, I moved from New Jersey to San Diego.
Ooh.
I wanted to, my dad lived there at the time, wanted to get to know him, and I was tired of being cold. And if you grow up on the East Coast, the idea of like LA, San Diego is like dream. It's like heaven, right? 75 degrees, sunny
Not
all
for
year
me,
long.
but for the
Right,
rest of the people, yeah.
right. And so I moved to California, and I went to a community college there, tried to get myself together academically because I didn't do very well in high school,
That's
probably
okay.
because of all of this stuff that I was going through.
Right.
Um, I didn't, I worked in high school, I worked almost 40 hours a week
Oh
at
wow.
a restaurant because my mom got food stamps and it wasn't enough food stamps for us.
Mm,
And I was like, where can I get a job that food will be cheaper and I won't have to, this goes back to like ways in which my childhood influenced myself as an adult. Like
right.
I was trying to figure out a way to make the stress of my mom going through this less. Like how can I make it easier on her? Because she's passed away since, but she was killing herself trying to like keep all this stuff together and
Right.
put up a brave front for me or whatever. And so like when I turned 15, I got a job as soon as I legally could.
Right.
And it wasn't because I wanted to work, it was because I was like, well, she only gets enough food stamps really for her. And
Right.
so I'll work at a restaurant and then I know at least I'll have food, right?
That's true.
And I worked probably more hours than was legally supposed to.
Right.
Didn't study in school. Anyway, I go to community college and I try to sort of get myself rebuild myself. And we were in an English class, and one of the books they made us read was a book called Savage Inequalities.
Mm,
It's by a guy named Jonathan Kozel, and he basically talks about how unequal the public education system is, like how these poor schools have no resources and how awful it is, and this isn't fair, and these rich suburbs have money or whatever. So anyway, we were assigned to read it.
right.
One of the chapters in the book was Camden, New Jersey's public education system,
Oh
right? So here
no.
I am 3,000 miles away in some random English class, and we were assigned the reading, and I'm reading the book, and I'm like, wait a sec. He was in the school I had been in, and he was
Wow.
in the book, had interviewed people and teachers and administrators that I had had. And
Mm, It
it
came
was
down
like,
on you.
yeah, it was totally the universe being like, dude, like this is a thing. I don't care how far you go, you need to address these things that you've gone
Right.
through, you know. And I'm in this class, and it's, you know, I'm probably one of only two black people in the class.
Oh
I'm the only
man.
person that has lived in New Jersey, and they're like, "Well, tell us how it was," you know. Um, but yeah, it has really. I have tried to find stability, um, financial stability. I have worked jobs that I probably shouldn't have and were really bad for me physically
Right.
because of my childhood with that sort of instability.
Right.
Um, so yeah, it's had a lot of effects on me, and also I think in my relationships, um, I tried to be the kid when I was little who was like, okay, like, you know, my sister, she was, you know, she was a girl and she wanted things, and my mom would try to give it to her and she would complain or whatever. And I tried to be the kid that was like fine with like, oh, what do you want for Christmas? Oh, nothing, I'm fine. I'm good, whatever you
Um,
give me, because I didn't want to add stress to my mom,
burden. Yeah.
right? And I have found that I have replicated that in my adult life where there
Wow.
were things that bothered me or
Right.
situations or things I wanted, and I didn't want to say I wanted it, even to myself, because I didn't want the disappointment of either not getting it or the stress of trying to get it or whatever. So there's definitely issues that sort of recycle, and they
Mm.
recycle enough that if you have the time to think about it, you know, these patterns, that you go,
Right.
oh, that's why I do that, right? And it doesn't mean that I don't still do it. Like I still,
Right.
right? Like it doesn't mean you stop, but at least the acknowledgement of what you're doing and going, oh, okay, right? And so even today, you know, my girlfriend will ask me, oh, what do you want for Christmas? And I'll be like, oh, no, you know, whatever you get me is fine. You know, or what do you want to eat for dinner? Oh, whatever you pick is fine. Like I don't like to, yeah.
That
And
might be good though. She don't have to cook nothing fancy. You
right,
get a bowl of
right.
cereal and you're done.
It
You're good.
is.
Your
It, you
belly's
know,
filled.
sometimes you know, it does definitely make it a little smoother, but the issue becomes when there are things you really do want, but you just don't
Right.
want to say, right? And so you're
Right.
kind of suppressing your own whatever.
Tires.
But
Yeah.
yeah, I would encourage people listening. First of all, I encourage anyone who can to go to therapy. You don't have to have a mental health problem to go to therapy.
Sure.
Understand that therapy is like going to the gym for your brain, right? You don't have to be
True.
fat to go to the gym. You go to
Right.
the gym to stay in shape, right?
Okay.
And I think, you know, we need to integrate mental health and just being sort of kinder to ourselves into agencies and organizations that deal with housing insecurity and deal with poverty, um, and take the stigma away from it. Um, a lot of us, you know, come from communities of color that may have a lot of stigma around therapy or around mental health treatment.
Right.
Um, I know that for guys, certainly guys of the generation that I'm from, that there's a lot of stigma around asking for help
Right.
and appearing vulnerable, saying when something is overwhelming. So yeah, that needs to be part of how we deal with this thing. It's not just about building more houses and making sure people have stable jobs and treating substance abuse. It's also about taking care of ourselves, um, and being kinder to ourselves and demanding that people be kind to us. So
That is definitely something to take out of this, guys. Our mental health is a very important part of your life. You can't without
huge,
your mental, you can't survive. Like you need a brain to think to
huge.
life. So if you don't keep that
Even if it's just sitting in the park on a bench for 5 minutes, getting off your phone,
right,
looking at the clouds and just like, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to go on a vacation to Aruba to take care of yourself, although that's nice, right?
No, it is
But
definitely nice, for
yes,
sure. If you can,
yes, but
go.
you can do little things for yourself, and have that cup of coffee in the morning, and sort of, I like to sit on my little balcony and have a cup of coffee and breathe and take a beat.
Right.
Um, so yeah,
Self-care is important, guys. It
yeah,
really is. It all depends. Find out what you like and do those things. And
yes,
honestly, sometimes you can't even just think about it yourself. You need to go to somebody who's professionally, know how
yes,
to really dig into your life, your childhood. A lot of things you do as an adult, it happened when you was a child, and there's a
yes.
cause and effect dilemma to that thing. So could be good, it could be bad, and you won't really know why you might twirl your hair all the time because mommy was hurting daddy, but the only thing you had was your hair. You just never know why you do these
Exactly.
things
Well,
until
and the thing is about therapists, that I had to learn was, you know, back in the day, people used to go to their priest or, their auntie or the bartender, like that was the therapist, right?
barbershop.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the barber shop
hair
or something like
salons.
that.
Yeah,
And the issue with those people, not just that they're not professionally trained, but
right.
it's about sort of proximity. Like you need to talk to people who have a bit of emotional distance from you
That's true.
and who can see things objectively, will tell you, like we talked about the Michael Jackson thing, like will tell you if you're doing something outrageous and won't sort of hide it because they're worried about damaging your ongoing relationship. Um, and people who they don't have any skin in the game, right?
That's
Like, the therapist doesn't care whether you like them or whether you like, they're just getting paid and they're going to tell you the real thing.
right.
So yeah, definitely pick people um, when you're talking to them, that you first of all, you feel like you can share stuff with them and you won't hear it back in clicks or in side
Mhm.
comments somewhere, which is often the issue with relatives or whatever.
That's
The
true.
therapist ain't gonna tell nobody. The therapist got nobody to tell.
Right.
Nobody cares in that therapist's life about your little drama.
That's
Um,
definitely true.
so yeah, I think that's a great takeaway. I wanted to make sure I hit on.
So you covered a lot of stuff in the beginning too about your now as an adult, you end up
Yeah.
being homeless. First, how's it insecure? And you said different levels. There's a lot of things we unpacked. You said your son has a disability. Um,
Yes.
and you also said that I forgot it, but I remember what you said. I'm gonna
Mm.
talk about that later. But oh yes, the different categories that they have and the categories that you technically fit in, which is surprising because your son has a disability. I would think that you'll get help because he has a disability, but
Well,
maybe they don't
yeah,
be
but
spared.
and the issue was he has, because he's on the autism spectrum, it's not a physical disability, and there's
Um,
often sort of discrimination based on that, right? And even within, he's on the autism spectrum, but he is what they call high
I
functioning,
think
which basically means that if you don't know anything about autism and you saw him, you wouldn't know that he had any issue,
right.
right? And he doesn't cause problems. He's not, he doesn't have Tourette's where he just starts yelling at people, right? He's just a good kid. You'd see a kid, you might think he's a little shy, but not within
The
the,
spectrum of
not
the
outside of, yeah. So that often is a problem, and I will say, even that is a problem for a lot of these agencies that deal with these issues, where they deal with the problem people.
right,
And if you are not acting out in a destructive way, either to yourself or to others, a lot of times you don't get the help that you need because
right,
people think, oh, you're okay, right? And
right,
so if you're not like, you know, attacking people physically, or if you're not like getting in trouble with the criminal justice system, you're just sort of struggling within yourself, but it's not manifesting in a way that these institutions see. A lot of times you don't get the attention that you need, you know
that's
and if
true.
you and for me, that has happened in my life a lot, where I was raised that, first of all, you don't put your stuff on other people. You shouldn't put your problems on other people, that's being inconsiderate. I was raised that you don't, especially in the Black community, is you don't want to embarrass your family or the Black community at large. So you
Right.
don't want to do things that is embarrassing
Right.
or that makes people look down on you. So like even today, when I go to HRA, I get dressed up to go to HRA.
Really?
Oh yeah,
Oh, wow.
right? Because my mom used to have this thing where she was like, Michael, we're poor, but we don't have to look,
That's
we don't
true.
have to act poor, whatever that means, right? And so I get washed and dressed and make sure I look presentable, right? Um, because there's all this internal stuff of you don't want to embarrass your family, you don't want to embarrass, you don't want to make Black people look bad, you don't want to make your family look bad or whatever. But the downside to that is often people think you're okay.
That's the thing. It's a mask on.
Right? If
Yeah.
I showed up to HRA and I was sort of like, just got out of bed and I was unshaven, if I was sort of like
Disheveled.
disheveled or whatever, I might get more attention because they're like, oh my God, this guy's trouble. We need to like make
Get him
sure he's
out.
okay. But then they
Right.
see me and I might be wearing a shirt with a collar and they're like, oh, he's fine. We don't need to rush his case. He's fine. He's a so but yeah, definitely there are all of these categories and I learned about here in New York City, it may be the same way in other cities as well, where we have this distinction between displaced and homeless. Now, I
Right.
didn't know anything about this before I got involved. And whether or not, first of all, you don't get to categorize yourself as either one of those. You get categorized by the agency.
Right.
And once you're categorized, you have to deal with totally different agencies with totally different bureaucratic structures. From what I've heard, different treatment. I've heard that people that are displaced are treated better. For those who don't know, displaced is things like your house burnt down, your apartment burnt down. For me, the landlord, the building got foreclosed on. So there's some circumstance that you can no longer practically live in the residence.
Right.
And so you get displaced, flooding, storms,
Yeah.
right?
Something out of your control, basically.
Something out of your control,
Right.
right? And then homeless is like, something it's supposed to be, it's more like your actions, right? Now,
Right.
the truth is that these are often very overlapping things. So there are many people who are categorized as homeless that they're homeless because of something that had nothing to do with them, right? So let's say um, you're living with a single parent or and one of your parents gets incarcerated and they were the ones paying the rent.
Right.
Well, you're considered homeless, not displaced,
Right.
even though you didn't do anything to
That's
become
true.
homeless, right? Um, but yeah, there's a sort of thing of deserving. One of the things that you find out when you're dealing with people in either poor policies around the poor or housing is there's this idea of who's deserving and who's not. And they're always trying to figure out, do you deserve to get these benefits or do you not? Now, the thing that irks me about this is policies that don't deal with the poor don't do this, right? So remember when we had the COVID and they were handing out these business loans? They
Right.
just gave out money.
They did.
They didn't check to see how many employees you had or whether blah, right?
They
Any
taking that now
policy,
though. If
yeah.
you take a
Now they're
loan.
like, right. And the reason is that we have this idea, many of us have this idea in the country that people who are poor are somehow undeserving. They did it to themselves.
Right.
And so they have to prove to me that they did. And you got to give all these documents that show whatever.
So much
Where
document.
where if you get a business loan, they're like, oh, if you file for a business files for bankruptcy, nobody looks down on you. People file for bankruptcy all the time.
Yes, they do.
all the
Yes, they
time, and
do.
they're just like, oh yeah, I can't pay my bills or whatever. Um, so there's all this idea of who deserves these policies, and the truth is, if you've ever paid taxes, like if you've ever gone to the bodega and bought a stick of gum and paid sales tax,
Right.
then you deserve the government, the city, the state, the county
Mm-hmm.
to take care of you when you need help. And if you paid into this system, that you deserve it, and you don't have to keep proving your worth.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, many of these policies are not like that. And so, part of the reason why displaced families get treated better than homeless families is there's this perceived deservedness. Oh, well, you got burned out of your house, and so it's not your fault. You might have caused the fire. They don't
Right.
know, right? They don't know. But they are putting on that a level of it's not your fault, that other people don't get, and it disturbs me. So yeah.
I like the point that you brought up about the taxes because a lot of people in shelter are working people who pay taxes every year,
Yes.
and it comes
Yes.
out of their paycheck every 2 weeks. But
Yes.
yeah, when you need help, they don't want to give you help, and
Yes.
you're paying basically you're paying for your spot,
Yes. And
literally.
and what's worse than the fact that they don't want to give it to you is that it's the internalized sense that many of us have, that, oh, I don't deserve this, right? Like, it's
Right.
bad enough when other people act like you don't deserve it, but the
Mm.
internalized stuff. But yeah, man, if every time you go to the store and pay state taxes, if you've ever worked at a job and they took FICA out, if we pay into this system,
We
this
do.
society, and every day, even if you don't realize you do. If you look at your light bill, there are taxes
Mhm.
on your light bill, on your cable bill, on you. If you've ever functioned in this world, you have paid into this system.
If you play the lotto and win, you're gonna get
Yes, you're
it.
going to pay tax. And the idea is, this goes. I was trained as a political scientist, so this is my social science part, right? The
Okay.
idea is it's called a social contract, and it is, I'm going to do my part and you're going to do your part, right? And so when you're in a society, you have a social contract, and it's like, okay, well, I'm going to pay taxes with the understanding that if my house is on fire, the fire department will come and put the fire out.
Right.
Or if somebody breaks into my home, the cops will come. And that's the transaction that we're doing every day, right?
Every day.
If I lose my house, if I need EBT, if my kids need to be educated, I'm going to send them to school, and you're going to pay the teachers, and right. And but the wealthy in this country have done a really good job at convincing the poor that you don't pay into the system, and
Right.
that we are doing you a favor by
Right.
sending the cops to your house, or the fire department, or the teachers. Like, we're doing you, this is out of, like, the kindness of our heart.
Kindness. The kindness.
Right. And the other thing, like, if you know about percentages, right? Like, the percentage that a guy like Elon Musk pays in taxes is lower than the average person. The average
Yes.
teacher, the average cab driver pays a higher percentage of their income
Yes.
in taxes than businesses, than rich people. And so we're doing the heavy lifting.
We are.
Many of us for our whole lives. I mean, I worked since I was 15,
Hmm.
and doing jobs that were physically exhausting, and sort of like long-term health effects, and breathing in all kinds of
Oh
chemicals and
my
hurting our
gosh.
backs and all this stuff. And then when it's time for us um, to to get the
To collect on
benefit
that.
of,
Right.
yeah, then we're supposed to feel ashamed.
Right. And that's a sad thing. I never thought about it like that. Like,
It's crazy.
if I'm not working anymore and I need some food stamps because I need some to eat because to survive or not, you die. I should be able to go to the office with my head held high because I work this much and I
Yes,
paid into this system. All I'm
yes,
doing is collecting the part that I need until I get a next job.
yes, And I am taking and the other thing that we know as social scientists is that people at the lower income spectrum, the money that they are given in terms of cash assistance and food is immediately put back into the economy, into the neighborhood, right? When
Exactly.
you give a person in the Bronx like me $10, I'm going to the bodega,
Right.
and that is going to help create jobs at the bodega, and that
Right.
bodega is going to pay business taxes that's going to help the Bronx, right?
Right.
I'm not going to take my money and park it in an offshore account where the
Right.
government can't tax it, or
Exactly.
or something. The money is stays right here.
In the community.
And so there's a multiplier effect, an economic multiplier effect when you give these resources that they don't even tell you about. They act like they're doing you this favor. We're not taking this food, we're taking this food money, we're going to the grocery store,
Right.
right? The local grocery store, and we're buying food with it, and then we're going to feed our kids, and that means our kids going to be healthy enough to grow up and pay taxes for the rest of their life.
Right.
It means the grocery store can pay their taxes, right? Um, so there's a level of sort of blinders that is intentionally put on our communities that we don't make these connections and see this stuff. Because once you realize this, then you demand to be treated with respect.
It's
Because
true.
you're like, I paid into this thing. Like, I don't, once you realize that they're not doing you a favor, you
Hmm.
have a different attitude. Like, you walk with a
It's
different
a little pep.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so of course there is a vested interest in many of these people that you don't realize this, that you feel that you come with your head down and like, please, Mr. Sir, can you give me a few coins of whatever? That's crazy. That's absolutely crazy.
It is. It truly is. It's interesting. I
Yeah.
think a lot of things we need to work on right now. I
Mm.
feel like New York City, honestly, shouldn't just be. I don't know if other states do this. We have so much different categories. Now we have the hercs because of the migrants coming in. I feel like we need to cut the categories out.
Yes.
I feel like it's so annoying going to the government for each. Oh, the youth need more housing or more vouchers. Then we go for the next month. We're going. The families need more vouchers. Then we
Yes.
go for men.
Yes.
No, can we
Yeah.
just put it all in one category so
Yep.
everybody can get the vouchers? So they go. It's like you have to advocate for so many things for the same thing,
Yeah. Yeah.
but
And
it's a
and the
different
truth is that
population.
and the truth is that most people don't fall cleanly in these categories. Most people
Problem.
overlap these categories. You might be a young person who's a veteran, also in the LGBT community, also
Right.
dealing with a disability, right? Um, but oftentimes I think, and this is kind of my cynical side, right, is these categories and boxes and these bureaucratic hoops are created because they want you to give up, right? The truth
True.
is that
It's true.
they don't want to fund the programs. Okay, if everyone who qualified for public assistance applied for it and got it,
Right.
they would probably have to double the budget.
They would have, yes, for
And
sure.
they don't want to do that, right? Because middle class people don't want their taxes raised because whatever, right?
Right.
And so they're structurally they create these sort of hurdles because they know a certain number of people are just going to give up. And that's going to minimize the number. And so a lot of this like categorization, I think, is designed to wear you down to
Mhm.
the point where you're just like, well, forget it. I'll just figure something out,
Right.
right? I'll sell drugs. I'll, you know, um, sell candy on the subway. I'll whatever. I'll try to come up with some kind of hustle, um, because going through the legitimate channels is just too much work. And I think um, if you ever want to see that, if you look at when I was growing up, I used to think bureaucracy, because all the bureaucracy I knew growing up was for poor people, is the welfare office or the food stamps or whatever. And I thought bureaucracy was inherently just like unwieldy and like all these levels and all this paperwork and whatever. If you ever want to see that it's not so, go to a bureaucracy that's made for rich people or just people with money, right? Go to Disney World,
Oh my
right?
God, Disney.
Disney World is a bureaucracy. Millions of people come into Disney World and they never stand in line, and the system is seamless, and they make sure everybody's room number and their credit card matches. They never lose your paperwork. Right? Because they know, because the clientele is a clientele that they respect, right? Go to, anything that has to go to a hotel for rich people and then go to a hotel for poor people and look at how it's
Yeah,
just a different thing, right? So it's not a matter of they can't do it. It's a matter of
you won't do it.
priorities and whether or not they value the people who they are dealing with, right? I mean,
Right,
even within like Medicare and Medicaid, right? Medicare is for if you're older of any income, healthcare for if you're older of any income. Medicaid is just for poor people.
right.
And if you have Medicare, you get treated better
Mm.
than if you have Medicaid. Right?
Wow.
If
I didn't
you
know that.
have, yeah, if you have, Social Security, just Social Security is for everyone over 65. Like Bill Gates gets Social Security.
Mm.
Elon Musk, when he's
That
over
must be some
65, will get
good,
Social
some
Security.
good money right there. I
Right.
can
But
imagine.
SSI and SSDI
Right,
is for poorer people or disabled people.
right,
And if you get Social Security, you get treated much better than if you get SSI, even though it's like, right?
right.
So, some of it is a matter of um, it's a matter of priorities. It's a matter of value. Back to this idea of worth and dignity, and um, how much dignity they ascribe to you. Which is why things like the whole joke about Karens, white Karens that go into the
Yes.
store and like I want to speak to the manager, right?
Yeah,
Well, the reason why in our mind that Karen is a white woman, middle-aged white woman,
right.
is because if you're a young person of color and you ask to see the manager, what's going to happen, right?
But
You know?
I'm not gonna lie to you. I'm a person on the phone and in person. If
Yes,
you acting crazy, I'm
you
acting from
should.
energy. Like you the little man, bro. I need to talk to somebody
Yes,
higher
and
up
you
because
should, and you
damn.
should, right? And you should.
Right.
And the other thing is like how we train ourselves to deal with this stuff. Like if you are a middle class white person, um, you are trained in how to navigate, like how to ask for the manager, how
It's
to write
true.
write to the corporate office, go
Right.
to the community board meeting
Be
at
annoying.
the right. Yeah, like they are taught very young, like
Yeah.
here are the levers of power,
Right.
and this is the people you have to do. Go to your assembly person or whatever.
Right.
Um, and we aren't taught those skills,
That's the thing.
and
Mhm.
we're just taught, well, yeah, well, you know how they're gonna do you. You just have to take it, right?
That's the thing.
Yeah. So we
Advocacy
need,
is important. That's
yeah,
the
we all
thing.
need to be more caring, like
Right.
in the
Yeah.
positive way.
It might be, yeah, in the positive, because Karen could go to the left real fast. But if you think about it, I never thought about Karen being an advocate for herself. Like
Yes.
I just never thought of it that way. But in a way, not every attribute of her is amazing. But being an advocate for yourself, speaking up for
Yes.
yourself, making
Yeah.
sure what is happening, if you don't like it, is wrong, and say
Yes.
something about it, that's
Yeah.
an important skill to have.
Sometimes what they're advocating may not be a good thing, right?
Right.
Like,
Right.
like the woman in Central Park that called the cops on the bird watcher because he told her to put the leash on her dog, right? But
Wow.
she was advocating for herself. She was doing it in a sort of loathsome way,
Right.
but she wasn't just like taking it. She was saying, these are the things I want. I'm going to find the means to get people in power to do the thing to get me the things that I want, right?
Right.
And to do not only, we need to know like how to do that, but more importantly, I think we need to understand that we're worth that, and that is like, that's bare minimum. Like,
Exactly.
advocacy is what you're supposed to, that's what you're supposed to
Right.
do. Right? But yeah, and we have to be, when you finally do that, like, all of this is a heavy lift, right? Understanding
Right.
your worth, not blaming yourself, being kind to yourself, learning the levers of self-advocacy and what works and what doesn't work. If you go into the HRA office and you try to grab the lady behind the counter by
Oh
the neck, well, that's
no. Can you
that's
imagine?
self-advocacy, but that's bad, right?
It is. Don't do that,
Um,
guys. Violence is
don't
not
do that,
nothing.
right? Don't do that. Um, but all of that's a heavy lift. But the other part of it is you have to be ready for the pushback, because when you do that, don't think that just because you've done the work of sort of learning all this stuff and feeling valued, that the system or the people in power are just going to be like, oh, no, there's going to be pushback.
Always
And
is.
there's going to be like, who the hell do you think you are? Like, what? what what are you doing? And you have to be ready for that, and you have to have, ways to combat that. The other thing I will say, and I want to make sure that I mention this too, is like, there's this thing, this African philosophy, it's called Ubuntu. I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, but it's Ubuntu. And it basically is a philosophy that says, I am because you are. It talks
Mm,
about that we all have value, not just in ourselves by ourselves, but because of our positioning and our connectedness to other people. Like, we have to understand that none of us get through life by ourselves. None of us achieve
true.
anything. There's nothing in your life you've ever achieved by yourself, whether you know it or not, right? Right? It's a different story. Like, whether you know people were helping you or not is a different story.
That's true.
But you have to, like, reach out to people and ask for help and understand that you can't do it all by yourself. This is not, Rocky, all our American movies, Rambo, all of these,
Oh,
the
Rocky.
single, the single guy does all the, Dirty Harry, right? It's very
Do, do.
American. Right, right. And sometimes, like, we convince ourselves that real life is like that, and that we could just, like, buckle down and try real hard and want it bad enough. Well, no, you have to use networks, you have to get help, you have to go to people when you feel overwhelmed and say, I'm overwhelmed, I don't know what the fuck I'm, or what the hell I'm doing. Oh, I was doing okay with the
You were doing so great. It's
uh,
okay.
right, like, you have to be able to say that and be okay with saying that,
Right.
um, and to know the people that you can say that to, that will be helpful for you, that won't just look at you and go, oh, well, I don't know what you're going to do.
Right.
um and so I want to make sure that people who lived in this experience and who are going through this stuff or may go through this stuff get that we all need each other. So yeah.
That is for sure, for sure. We all are connected. And I'm a person who I was that person. I was Rocky. I was like, I gotta
Oh
fight
yeah.
through it myself and getting
All
it
right.
through. But honestly, especially being homeless, you have to rely on a lot of systems just to survive. I was working most of the time, but sometimes when I wasn't working, I have to rely on welfare more heavily because it's like, they if you don't know how much they give you, it ain't that much. So to live on
No.
it is already a struggle. But
No.
because I wasn't working, I did get a quarter and a half more, a
Yeah.
little bit something like that. And I have to rely on the SOTA system. I have to rely
Yes.
on workers. I have to rely on all these systems I don't want to rely on. And I ask myself, how did I get here? Like
Yes.
I had my daughter in the hospital homeless. I'm like, I brought you into the world and you're homeless. I felt
Yeah.
so bad. Like I
Yes.
feel as a mom and you just got here. Like you
Yes.
literally popped out of me and I'm
Yes.
I'm feeling already.
Yep.
So I learned to have to rely on things. Obviously, I rely on God the most out of
Yeah.
anybody
Yeah.
because he can bring me the furthest out of life. But I had to rely on these systems or put in place to help me. And one thing I can tell you about the system, if you don't know how to do certain things, ask questions, but also make sure if you think the question that don't sound right, ask somebody else, because
Hmm.
it might be people have their different views on things, and some people don't want to tell you the information. They're gatekeeping on information, or they tell you a lie about something when they're supposed to be actually helping you. Like
Yes.
I was in the hospital, somebody said, "Oh, I don't have a place to go." Instead of
Hmm.
helping me to get into the shelter, they said, "We're gonna take your baby." I'm confused. All I need is housing. All I need is somewhere to go. Because the thing about it, when I went to PATH and I was pregnant, they said, no, you can't come in.
Yes.
If I got the hospital workers to help me properly, I could have probably gotten to PATH much faster and got help
Yes.
much faster and sooner if they did their job. But no,
Yes.
first word, oh, ACS.
Yep.
Can I breathe for a second?
Yeah. I'm a bad parent because I'm in the hospital. Yeah. 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 No, I had a situation at when we were still, I think they had just before they had moved us into the shelter. We were still in this apartment and the lights are out. Like I lived in the apartment. We lived in the apartment for 2 months with no electricity.
How you charge your phone?
We went to a
Oh,
library and a hospital, right? And I was working at the time. Like I was working as a writer, like remotely. And
right.
so I literally had to go to the lobby of the hospital to hook up to the internet to do
No.
the research to turn it into my boss,
Oh
right?
my
And I was
gosh.
too ashamed to tell my boss, "Oh yeah, I don't have electricity." Like how garbage does that sound, right?
Wow.
But anyway, I went to get a CityFHEPS housing voucher, right? And I went to Bronx Works, and I finally found it. I went to one agency, and they were like, "Oh yeah, you're in the wrong zip code. We can't help you."
That's amazing.
With no alternative, just we can't help you. And so
Right.
anyway, I went down to this office, Bronx Works, to get the city voucher, and was told, first of all, can we just say, what is the deal with these agencies to help the poor? Like only opening for like 3 hours at like 7 o'clock in the morning,
Oh
and you
my
gotta
gosh.
got to line up for 2 hours beforehand, and like I don't understand what that ain't enough chairs, so you got to stand up. I don't
It
get that.
got worse after COVID though. Before COVID, it
Yeah,
wasn't that bad.
and
I
this
used to
was
be at
before
some of those
COVID.
things. Yeah.
Yeah,
This
it's
before COVID?
really, yeah, this before COVID, and it's
Oh
really weird. Like
wow. Mind
again,
blown.
this goes to like the treatment of the poor, right? Like,
Right.
oh well, we don't open all day. We only open for 3 hours, and you got to line up, and we're only gonna anyway. So I go down there, and um, they're like, well, are you in the military? Were you in the military? And I'm like, no. Okay, well, we only give out city vouchers to people that were in the military, so you don't qualify. And I was real dejected, like, man, and I go home, go to the hospital to get on the internet on my little phone
Right.
and go to their website
Right.
and look at the qualifications for the voucher.
Right.
Nowhere in there does it say you have to be a veteran. Nowhere.
Wow.
And and I'm thinking, well, and I had been trained as a researcher, right? And
Right.
so I'm trying to find the information. I'm like, well, maybe I'm looking wrong, and I'm digging and digging and digging. And I finally find the actual qualifications for what you need. And I realized that I qualified,
Right.
right? And this person had told me bull-faced, oh no, if you're not a veteran, you can't get it. So I went back, I printed out the qualifications for the
Right.
voucher
As you should.
and went back 7 o'clock in the morning, right? And went to a different person, and they again told me, oh yeah, it's only for veterans. So then I pulled out the paper and said, well, this is from your website.
Right.
They looked at it with surprise. They
Mm.
didn't know. So here's this person who's a gatekeeper and a caseworker for
Right.
people qualifying for housing vouchers, right? Very serious position, people in very dire situations.
Right.
This person, and it was two different people, right? The person that told me first and the person I went back to.
Right.
So somehow in their training, they're not even training their people what the
Properly.
qualifications are,
Right.
right?
An important thing
So,
for housing. Oh,
oh my God. And that goes to the self-advocacy thing. Like
right.
I I think all the time as I was going through this, what about people who English is not their first language?
Oh, yes.
Or people who, have less than a high school education. I mean, I was able to find this stuff online. There's people who don't know how to work the internet
Right.
or find this stuff, right? Like I have good English skills. I have good sort of like, research skills, and it was hard for me. And I
Right,
think about, all of these people, what about you're coming from a war zone, trying to get a refugee, and
right.
you came across the border and barely survived, and
Barely.
now they want you to come up with all kinds of documentation. You're like, dude, I just came out of a refugee camp.
Right,
I don't even speak the language. So, when we think about these things and the hurdles that we face, I consider myself, lucky in many ways to have, some skills to be able to, and even with the skills that I have, it's tough for me.
right,
And I remind myself, I was lucky that my son was an adult at the time and that he could process this stuff. God
right.
forbid if he was 1, 2, 3 years old and
Oh
I
my
had to have
God.
him with diapers and all. It was hard enough him being an adult and having to manage this stuff.
Right.
Um, so yeah, we need to have those people in mind and just demand better treatment for ourselves. Yeah.
Yes, for sure, for sure. He hit on a lot of different stuff in this episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you guys learned something
I could
from
talk about this stuff forever.
if you want him to come back on, we could definitely have him for a second episode. I just want you to take away from this podcast that advocacy is a thing. Now everybody
Yes.
fits in categories also, but we need to find a way as us as our community and all people who are listening to us who are lawmakers, that we need to open those categories up to make sure that everyone who needs help can fit in those categories. Because
Yes.
it makes no point to have people who are homeless, but yet they don't fit in the parts, so they're not getting help. It doesn't make any sense
Yeah. No.
to do things like that. So
No. It's
for
crazy.
sure. Yes.
Thank you for inviting me,
Thank you for
and
coming
and
on.
yeah, and thank you for just having this platform. I think that, like we talked about, there's sometimes a lot of shame around this stuff. And so having this platform where it can come into people's homes and they can hear this stuff and not have to worry about judgment or whatever and seek this sort of conversation out is really good for people. And you may never know all the people who you've helped with this. So it's just trickling out there in the universe. You may never
Right.
know the total number. So.
With his background with the universe behind him. So it's like the galaxies.
Thank you again. You guys have a great day.
Thank you for coming on. Thank you guys. Talk to you next week. And if you want to join the podcast, definitely email us. If you want to talk to me directly, because we have other teammates and we have a new fellow, so she's coming on soon.
Awesome.
They watch, they look at the DMs. So if you want to talk to me directly, my information will be in the link tree down below. I think it's literally the last thing on it because my stuff is not as important as having the actual podcast and the resource packet. So you can find my information down below. You can talk to me personally on my
Oh,
Instagram.
and you know what? I'll give you my I'll give you my Twitter or whatever, and you can put it
Yes,
down there as well if
for
people want
sure.
to see me on Twitter or whatever. Okay?
Yes. So his link will be down below after we finish this. I edit it in, and we'll put all of those things down below, guys. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being amazing, and we see you next time.
Bye.
Bye. Okay,
That's great.
hold on. Was it gonna stop? No, it's not. I got a lot of editing.